I'd like to introduce our first panel discussing the importance of maintaining 2 qualified pilots on the flight deck. Here to lead this discussion is ALPA's President, Captain Jason Ambrosi.
Thank you. Come on out. All right, we're back. You can't get rid of me. You might ask, why am I moderating a panel? Well, because this is something that's important. Everything's important, but this is something that's on the horizon, that's real. It's an imminent threat, and it needs to be, it needs our utmost attention. And I'm very passionate about having 2 qualified, well-trained, and well-rested pilots, at least 2 on the flight deck at all times. So today we're going to talk about reduced crew operations and the threats out there related to that, because some feel like it's not really an imminent threat. Some airlines like Delta and United, we've negotiated language in our contracts that say at least 2 pilots on the flight deck. It's not something that's imminent in the U.S. Well, if it happens in other parts of the world, which you're going to hear from this group today, it's going to come to our shores at some point. And we're here to stop that, because this is a safety issue. The proponents for some of this will label it as an industrial issue. They'll say that we're just a labor union, so we're trying to protect jobs, and that we're anti-technology. You've all heard that crap from these people. So the fact is that it's not. The most important safety device, you're going to hear us say it over and over again, the most important safety device on any aircraft is a minimum of 2 well-trained, qualified, and well-rested pilots on the flight deck at any time. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the terms we're going to use today before I introduce our panelists. What is RCO, reduced crew ops? You're hearing fancy terms. They're trying to use terms that don't say single pilot or no pilot. You'll hear EMCO, or extended minimum crew operations. Well, that is basically single pilot crews, which you'll hear from our panelists here in a little bit. SIPO, which is single pilot operations, and there's an option for single pilot optional on some airplanes that they're talking about going. But again, this is an imminent threat. It's a major threat to the safety of our traveling public and cargo, as well as our fellow crew members. I can't reiterate enough, though, that we're not anti-technology. Some people that have been, in the past have, old man yells at clouds, we're anti-technology, all that kind of stuff. We're not. But we can embrace the technology, use that technology, and also keep the pilots on the flight deck to make sure that technology is working correctly. You'll hear during the discussion, and you'll hear from the folks that are pursuing this, that it's safety, that getting 1 pilot on the flight deck during cruise, that's the first slippery slope, but that's a safety. We're enhancing safety. Make no mistake, this is an economic argument. They're trying to save money, and then if airlines around the world start trying to save money by doing this, it's going to end up coming to our shores here in North America. So, we're here to fight it. We're passionate about it, and we'll explain that. So, I'd like to introduce our esteemed group of panelists here. I'll start with, on my left, Captain Bill Secord, MD-11 captain for FedEx, and he's an executive vice president here at ALPA, and he's also the chair. I made Bill our chair of the Reduced Crew Ops Committee when I got elected this year. So, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So, as Jason said, my name is Bill Secord, and I've been very lucky to have a very diverse career in aviation. I've done Part 91, 135, 121 flying, 91 flying for different corporations or owners, Part 135 obviously charter. Both scenarios, both areas I've held management positions. Part 121 I was able to fly for TWA back before 9/11, flying the MD-80. In 06 I was hired by FedEx been flying, I sat the back seat of the 727, the right seats of the 72, the MD-11, and I've been an MD-11 captain now for about 6 years. So as far as RCO goes, Jason mentioned I'm the RCO chair, but I've been advocating for ALPA's RCO position in one form or another since 2018.
Thanks, Bill. Next, Captain Paul Reuter. Did I say that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Paul Reuter. He's the Vice President and Professional Affairs Director for the European Cockpit Association, as well as a captain on the 737 for Luxair. Paul.
Yes, thank you for having me, Jason. Hello, everyone. So yeah, I started a flying career in '95 on the ATR, moved up a little bit on turboprops on the Fokker 50, did some Embraer 145 as a captain and some Dash 8, and finally I'm on the 73 and the 73 MAX. Is it still called that? I don't know, we call it that. For what is probably the smallest national carrier still in existence in Europe, Luxair. I've been working at IFALPA and at DCA for, I think, the better part of 15, 20 years, starting as many of us in the AAP, the Accident Investigation Committee, Accident Prevention Committee it's called now, moved on to some human factors, moved on to ECA, did some big data stuff for ECA on a project called Data for Safety. When I was technical director, and right now doing professional, partly industrial stuff, and since 2 months I've had to jump in as a vice president, which, well, which brought me into contact with RCO for the first time. And now I'm glad to be here and hope that we can convince you that this is a fight worth fighting.
Well, thank you, Paul. Next, Captain Craig Bomben. Vice President, Flight Operations, Company Chief Pilot, Vice President, Design, Build, and Boeing Tests and Evaluation for Boeing. Craig is joining us today to educate and level set in terms of automation in aircraft design. So we appreciate you joining the panel, Craig.
Thanks, Jason. So like Jason said, I'm the chief pilot for the company. I'm fortunate to be able to cover the commercial, military, and then global engagement and training side of the business. So all the pilots that work for Boeing fall up under me, and so it's a great job. But I'm not an airline pilot, never was an airline pilot, thought I was gonna be, but never, I always had different opportunities come up, and so mission applicability is really important to us, and that's why we believe staying closely tied to this group and others, staying closely tied to the customers is extremely important. We're deeply focused on safety and human factors, and so spending time with the customers, spending time with the union is important for us, so we understand what the really big rocks are for these individuals and how we can help to work with the pilot unions, with the pilots, with the airlines, and just really promote safety in the industry. So we're gonna have more discussion later about that, but it's really, I'm here because I'm deeply concerned about safety, and I wanna make sure we do the right thing.
Thanks, Craig, for joining us. And last but not least, Gordon Margison, Senior Technical Officer for IFALPA, International Federation of Airline Pilots Association. Gordon.
Thank you, Jason. So my background is from Canada. I started flying a small airplane for what can be described as an unsafe operator. They've since lost their AOC.
At least you're honest.
Absolutely. That led me to eventually go towards a career at the international level. I started in IATA looking at aviation safety through data collection analysis. Moved on to ICAO, where I had the pleasure to work in the flight operations safety section, and have been at IFALPA for the last 7 years, where my role is to be a go-between between you and your associations and ICAO. And in doing that, we're always pushing for using the limited international resources in the best way possible to bring the most amount of benefit from the safety side. And when we look at RCO and we see that balanced against all of the other strong candidates to improve safety, we see that it can be a distraction, and we want to make sure that ICAO and through our associations, the national governments are focusing on those things that can most improve safety. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here. I know that since I've had this short period of time, I've learned a lot about the ICAO process, and way more than I ever thought. So I'm glad that folks like you are keeping us on track and telling us where we need to be and what we need to do to move the ball forward for our members. All right, let's jump into it. Obviously, the risks associated with reduced crew ops, single pilot ops are well documented. Most prominently, the risks are increased workload for that remaining pilot, the elimination of that critical layer of redundancy, monitoring, and the inability for a single pilot to handle many of the emergency situations where you need to split the responsibility. So, I'll ask this for each of you. We can start with Bill and work our way down. Can each of you go into a little detail about your biggest current concerns on these, reduced crew suggestions, the models that we see today, and how could this affect our global standards that have been put in place for aviation safety?
Yeah, sure. I think here at ALPA, we believe that Part 121 aviation has become the safest mode of transportation in the world because of, not despite, 2 well-trained, well-rested pilots. But as Jason mentioned earlier, we're not anti-technology like many paint us. If you look back through our history, we've always supported new technology. I mean, pick your poison. We had TCAS, EGPWS, modern autopilots, all good technologies. And they all have one thing in common. They're there implemented into the airplanes, into the cockpits, to support a fully complemented 2-pilot crew. But for us to really understand the biggest threats of RCO, I think we need to understand the impetus behind the RCO push, the goals of those that are supporting RCO. And anytime you're looking at an organization's true beliefs, if you look at their own data, their own presentations, you get the truth, right? So we have one OEM that's our friends across the pond, and they're selling to their customer base the concept of EMCO, Extended Minimum Crew Operations, a very innocuous term, or at least sounding term, but what it basically means is me and one of you getting in an airplane here in Chicago, flying to Paris with no RFO, just the 2 of us. They're also suggesting that their new narrow-body freighter, once it's certified, could be flown single pilot as soon as 2028. So the obvious question is why? Why would we want to do this? Well, it's not aviation safety. If you look at their own presentations, it's cost reduction, plain and simple. They're looking to reduce the operator's costs as much as possible by removing the most critical, redundant safety system in the airplane, a second well-trained, well-rested pilot. So to me, the biggest threat right now, as far as reduced crew operations goes, is the idea that it's just EMCO. It's just extended minimum crew operations. It's just removing an RFO from the flight deck, okay? Whether they want to paint it this way or not, EMCO is single pilot operations. There'll be long periods of time when there's only 1 pilot in the cockpit, and that's unacceptable. It's unsafe, it's unacceptable. And that's not the end game. EMCO is just one step down the path to true single pilot operations, which would have 1 pilot on the airplane, and then further down the road to full autonomy. And remember, all done in the guise of saving a few bucks for the operator.
Paul.
Yeah, so, well, unfortunately, this originated in Europe. So we've been very closely confronted with this. Personally, I mean, I subscribe to everything Bill said, and what scares me the most, apart from the fact that we kind of that we take the redundancy away in the crew, is that I have the impression that it's a new approach to how we approach, well, some in the industry want to approach and tackle safety. When I look at how we approach this, suddenly, when I look at the arguments, it's going to be good for safety because it's good for fatigue. The guys, they can rest more in the bunk. They should have proper rest before the flight, and there's no scientific study yet that confirms that in the bunk you'll have any quality rest anyway, and I think all of us who do bunk rest know that. But it's the approach that, and it's a symptom of what's happening in the industry. We take safety for, not we, but some people take safety for granted in the industry, so we can go pick on it. And this is exactly the thing, and it's a totally different approach, and all of us who've been confronted with this RCO approach by some OEMs and by EASA feel that, or can feel that you know, we just pretend to a certain reality. When we come up with an issue, a safety issue, and we can't find a way around it, we'll pretend that we'll have technology to deal with it, or we'll pretend that, you know, in due course we will find a solution. And in fact, what we're doing is we're introducing more safety risk for purely commercial reasons. And this approach, I think we've been a safe industry because in the last 50 years that has not been the approach. We've looked together with authorities most of the time, even if we were not in agreement, together with airlines, together with OEMs. I think we can all say that when we work with them, we looked together at an issue, we identified a proper safety issue, and we were all, even if we had maybe nuances in how to deal with it, we were all aware and understanding of the seriousness and where the safety problem lies. And this is kind of a political approach to safety. We'll get it, it'll work out. You know, and that's what's scaring me.
Yeah, and I look forward to your thoughts when we get into EMCO in a little bit more detail about EASA and what's up with that, quite frankly, why that's going that way. Craig. Hey.
Yeah, you know, when we went from 3 crew to 2 crew, there was actually an airplane design change. We got rid of the FE panel. We brought, you know, all the functionality. We either automated it or we brought it forward, and we divided the automation between the pilot and first officer. This is a little bit different. Our airplanes, as far as I know, there has not been a commercial airplane built yet that was designed for single pilot operations. And because of that, there's certain things that you cannot do from a single seat. I think of Boeing, and one of them would be a jammed control. It requires both pilots to free up a jam control. And so what we're doing is we're taking a model-based systems engineering approach to it, and we're laying out the scenario, and we're looking at what the failures are and what those failures would result in, and if there is technology to counter that. I just want people to know this has picked up a head of steam, and so we could not ignore it, so we're looking at it. A couple things I think about: a incapacitated pilot. Think about the fact that a pilot has a seizure on the flight deck, and as he's having the seizure, he reaches up and disconnects the autopilot. And now you have an airplane that's not being flown for the 10 to 15 minutes that it takes the pilot, even if there's an alert, to get the pilot that's in the rest mode out of the bunk and back into the cockpit. What happens to the airplane during that? So how do we counter that? We know malicious pilots have been an issue in the past. How do we counter malicious pilots? So there's a lot of scenarios. I know there's some technology being developed out there right now that is being touted as the technology required to go to reduce crew ops. I'm not saying that we won't get there at some point, but I'm telling you right now that there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and in my personal opinion is I'm not sure with the current airplane designs that we can get to a place where we could afford to have a single pilot in the cockpit. One other thing I think about also is the psychology behind it. We've all been on those long flights. Even though I'm not an airline pilot, I do take airplanes to the Paris Air Show, and you know, we're up there in cruise for 8-10 hours, and just having somebody to talk about stuff with keeps you awake. And so sitting up there by yourself, I could see a lot more incidents of people falling asleep. And so Boeing is not going to support any effort that doesn't meet equal or greater level of safety. And right now, I don't know the technology that we currently have supports what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Craig. Gordon.
Well, thank you. And building on what the other panelists have said, it's important to remember this isn't happening in isolation. This proposal is happening while there's reviews on pilot age, and we've heard the commercial argument come out on pilot age, and we've pushed back saying that that needs to be a scientific view. We've heard changes, we've been seeing changes to fatigue management, and remember that this is being pushed in a big way as proposed as a safety benefit to improve fatigue management. We think that that's better handled by looking at the scientific principles and building in a proper approach where you have a positive safety culture. And we think that it makes more sense to invest in a positive safety culture where people are comfortable reporting, you can get more information in. And so when you look at other things happening at ICAO, other initiatives, those are also trying to borrow against the exemplary safety record that has been built up over many years. And so adding one extra thing, you're moving one layer out when other people are moving layers out as well. And so I think that's something to consider.
Very well. Let's move on to advanced aircraft technology. So, we need to balance the benefits and obviously the dangers of going to higher levels of automation. And with the ever-changing world of technology, can each of you go into a little detail about the way new technology is shaping the outlook in aircraft and efficiency, decision-making capabilities, and safety, and considering possible failures and over-reliance on technology and the loss of human oversight. Bill?
Yeah. I think there's no doubt at all that over aviation history, there's been some hugely positive moves forward in aviation technology. I mean, just look back in the last 30 years. And these technologies have allowed us to go from hand-flying airplanes from VOR radio to VOR radio to actually putting us in an environment where we have better situational awareness. And better situational awareness fosters an environment for better decision-making. Unfortunately, airplanes are machines, and we all know machines malfunction. And sometimes machines malfunction so catastrophically that the airplane is lost. And in those instances, there are some in the industry that are very quick to point their fingers at the pilot. It's always the pilot's fault, pilot error. The pilots become the scapegoat. And there are even others within the industry that would like to remove pilots from the cockpit completely when the technology allows, because according to them, pilots make all the accidents or cause all the accidents. So if we remove them, it would be a huge improvement in aviation safety. The problem with those conversations is that when this is all brought up, it's never discussed on how pilots save the day every day. I mean, how many times have you been flying an airplane and it started doing something weird and you looked at the guy next to you, the girl next to you, and say, what is this doing? Where's it going? How many times have you done a checklist or a QRH and stopped a small issue from becoming something larger? All of that's none of that's recorded in the SMS data. There's no tracking of that. How many times have you dealt with a major issue and ended up landing the airplane safely? So, the idea of removing the pilot from the cockpit somehow removes pilot or human error from the equation is just ridiculous. We've got airplanes that are designed, built, programmed, and maintained by humans. There's no way to remove human error from the equation. But by removing the pilot from the cockpit, what you're doing is you're removing the only safety system on the airplane that can think outside the box when an emergency requires it. I mean, think of United 232 in Sioux City, Iowa, or US Airways 1459 in the Hudson. Both emergencies required major outside the box thinking, and because those crews were able to do it, they saved hundreds and hundreds of lives. So, you mentioned over-reliance on technology. That's a problem today, right? I mean, we're all aware of the safety alert for operators that was put out about a decade ago from the FAA, and the advisory circular that was put out late last year dealing with pilots' over-reliance on automation and how that causes our hand-flying skills to atrophy, right? In those documents, the FAA talks about how our cockpits, as we add more technology, it's going to require more and more training for the pilots. And they go on to say how our hand-flying skills are paramount to aviation safety. Okay, so take that, what I just said, put that aside, remember that for a second. Now let's go to a scenario, okay? There's one OEM who has a very specific plan for single pilot operations. You're going to taxi the airplane out to the center line of the runway. That's if they don't continue their automatic taxi technology. So they're going to graciously let you taxi out. When you hit the auto flight, when you get on the center line, you're going to hit the auto flight button. And other than putting the gear and the flaps up and putting the flaps and the gear back down, you're not going to touch a thing until the airplane lands and decelerates on the center line at your destination. So what are we there for? or they're in case the automation fails. So based on what we just talked about, how can I as a pilot be expected to have the requisite skill set to be able to save the day, to be able to hand fly an airliner? You know, if we haven't flown the airplane in who knows how long, months, maybe years. I mean, granted, you'll have been to the sim in 6 or 9 months, but actually hand flying the airplane in who knows how long, and now all of a sudden you're dumped an airplane, you're hand flying it, and oh, by the way, you have to deal with the emergency that actually caused the automation to fail. You know, talk about work overload, right? So the idea here is remember, all this is being done to save a few dollars. Going to remove the pilots, add this technology, and by doing so, we're going to introduce this major degradation in aviation safety to our national airspace system and basically, you know, the global airspace system. So, you know, I agree with the FAA. There absolutely has to be some kind of balance between reliance on automation and hand flying, and I tell you, this is not the right road, not the next step.
So Paul, maybe speak to the data perspective and, you know, what and ECA, human factors.
Yeah, well, I think, again, picking up where Bill stopped, you know, when we talk about, if you're in safety management, you talk about safety one, which is, okay, let's look what went wrong, which is the easy thing, you know. And now we're talking at least a lot more about what we call safety two, which is let's find out what went right, why things did not evolve from a failure or something more to a serious incident, because there was a crew that coordinated, maybe thought out of the box, and solved the problem before it became a statistic. And that is, of course, something that up till now we were not able to do, but now they have a lot of data with the new, you know, with the new technology. You have a lot of data, what's happening in the cockpits, flight data, radar data, everything. And once we start looking, and you know, Eurocontrol has this project as well, where we're looking at what went right. Why do we have these people? What does the human do right? That is where we can learn. And I mean, if you're flying an airplane in a crew, you've noticed it. I mean, if you have a guy there and your decisions are better than the sum of your parts. I mean, usually, you know, the human is a system that we have shortcomings, design limitations, but we also have something that machines don't have, at least yet, which is creativity, which is this thinking out of the box. And it's our own skin that is in the airplane. Let's not forget that. And all of this is kind of not looked at because we want to have RCO. And again, I mean, if you would told me 10 years ago that we're discussing this, I would have thought, you're childish. Where do you get this idea? Unfortunately, now we sit here, and I think that is worth noting.
Yes, for sure, for sure. You know, Craig, maybe a little different angle. How about how is the aircraft manufacturing industry, you know, prioritizing safety when you design and produce aircraft with these higher automation levels?
Yeah. So we have a mantra at Boeing that to buy its way onto the airplane, it has to provide value to the customer and or improve safety. And so it's a pretty easy test to go with. You think about things like improved engines, right? The improved engines are we have pretty safe engines these days. We're not really improving the level of safety, but what we're doing is we're making the engines more efficient. So that provides a lot of value, but it gives you the same level of safety as the previous engine. We will never put something on the airplane that actually provides value to the customer while taking away from the safety of the airplane. So that's a really big test that we look at. And so, you know, with that, we look for things that are going to assist the pilots, right? We're looking for automation, and people get really nervous when we say automation because they think it means, okay, you're taking jobs away from me. But we're looking for automation. A prime example would be enhanced angle of attack that we're doing. It automatically isolates the scenario. It automatically isolates the angle of attack probe that's bad. And instead of having a really high workload scenario in the cockpit, it's really reduced the workload for the crew. So That's what I consider automation. It's assisting the pilot doing the job, which doesn't mean taking the pilot out of the cockpit. You know, over the years, we've had a difference in philosophy on airplane design, and it was documented and written down that we definitely designed our airplanes differently than Airbus. We didn't put restrictions. We didn't take control away from the pilots. I will tell you that the industry's changing, and we're getting a different population flying our aircraft, and so we are moving towards more automation, and that makes me really nervous. It's something that I grapple with on a daily basis. You know, what level of automation is correct? Because it's great to have automation, but if you're doing stuff like taxiing out, pushing a button, it's going to fly you from point A to point B, land the airplane. What skill set do the pilots have? And so as that automation, which is great to assist the pilots, as that starts to fail, because aeromechanical machines and stuff does fail over time, do we have a population of pilots that can actually take over an airplane and do basic piloting skills? So I'm really grappling with, you know, how much automation do we do in the airplanes? It's not going to decrease the overall skill level so that we can continue to, you know, aviate, navigate, communicate, and fly airplanes in extreme conditions when we start having failures.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. So Gordon, you know, how does ICAO and IFALPA, you know, the ADO group, look at the aircraft design issues?
Well, it's an interesting perspective because pilots, you're seeing what's going on, and when you see something that can be done better, should be addressed, you're able to be an important voice in how that can be brought up to your association, to ALPA, to IFALPA, to bring together viewpoints from across the pilot community of pilot associations around the world. From there, those get taken to the manufacturers. We have a very good relationship with all the major manufacturers. They will often even attend IFALPA meetings. We also have pilot presidents at ICAO panels. So I'll talk a little bit about panels a bit later on, but there is where decisions are being made and being shaped. And often the IFALPA representative, so the pilot in the room, is the only pilot in the room, with engineers, with professional civil servants. And giving that perspective, it shapes the discussion in a very positive way.
Very well. So, you know, let's talk about EMCO a little more. We know it's an economic issue. It's being touted as a safety issue. I guess I'm a moderator. I'm supposed to be neutral. If you've figured out, I'm not. But my concern, one of the biggest concerns, right, is you'll hear, oh, better rested pilots on arrival. Yeah. You know, better rested pilots on arrival sounds like a good thing. It is a good thing. Better rested pilots on arrival. You know, I think that having 3 or more pilots on an international long-haul trip gives you better rested pilots on arrival. Some think that, well, because of weaker flight time, duty time regulations in other parts of the world, that this is a good thing, having this EMCO concept because it allows that. You know, I feel like it's the opposite. What that's going to do is if EMCO is allowed to expand around the world, it'll actually cause a global drive to the bottom and lowering standards for those of us that have better augmented rules in this part of the world. So, you know, I think that that's something that really needs to be considered. You know, I'll go back to Gordon here. Can you talk a little bit about the working papers and what was done at the ICAO 41st Assembly last fall?
With pleasure. So the ICAO Assembly is where all 193 member states gather, and last fall was when this concept first officially got introduced. We saw 3 papers. The first one was from manufacturers introducing the concept of EMCO, talking about primarily the fatigue benefits, and we'll see that fatigue mitigation is a recurring theme when we're talking about EMCO. They also do address some of the economic benefits, and they're saying that ICAO should put resources into creating a framework, a concept of operations for how this could be addressed. The next paper came from a regulator perspective. It was submitted by the European Union and Eurocontrol, and there it was also introducing EMCO, but bringing up the concept of EMCO as a stepping stone to single pilot operations. That highlighted the role of the regulator, and one important caution in that paper was it recognized that not all regulators have the skill set, have the knowledge, or have the resources to be able to fully consider the implications of these two concepts. As you can imagine, we wanted to make sure that the pilot voice was heard as well. So IFALPA, together with our member associations and with a lot of positive input from ALPA, and thank you to ALPA for that, put together a paper to respond to these two. That paper called for a contextualization of the requests in the first two papers, saying that we need to be thinking about the resources and does investing ICAO resources, and keeping in mind that as an international organization, ICAO is facing a pretty severe set of budget constraints. And so any work that they put in on EMCO or SIPO is taken away from work that can be done on other things. And so the IFALPA paper called for a lot of caution. And we were very happy. We got a lot of support from Costa Rica, who helped co-sponsor our paper and get it in for discussion. And the IFALPA paper received a lot of support from the floor.
So that's how it works. You need to get a country, right, to sponsor our paper in order to get the paper in.
It's not totally necessary, but it does facilitate a lot of things. From a practical level, it changes some of the timelines from when you can get papers in. And we needed a bit of time to make sure that we got the message right. And the other side, any paper that's submitted needs to be translated into all 6 ICAO languages. And by having a country work with us, that meant that we had access to the ICAO Translation Bureau, who helped us with that process. So we're very grateful to Costa Rica for their support.
I still struggle with English, so good for you to put it in 6 languages. Craig, your customers are asking for this, right? Because it's a competitive issue. Is that what's driven? It's not the regulators here on our side of the pond, right?
It seems like it's a mix, and I'm not really sure where it originated from, but it seems like it's a little bit of a mix between some OEMs pushing it and some customers, asking for it. And so I'm not really sure where the original request came from, but so I can't really answer that. I guess.
We're here, right?
Yeah, right,
We're
exactly.
here. I guess it doesn't really matter where it came from. We're here. We're here, and we're fighting on it right now.
Right.
It's in your backyard, Paul. This is front and center in Europe, and
I apologize.
yeah. So can you explain a little bit how EASA is getting in front of the study on it over there, right? And
yeah. Well, it's I must say it's a little bit strange. This came up. EASA seems to be driving this, or parts of EASA seem to be driving this. And what we've seen is, not really a transparent approach. We've been kind of involved, but at a very, can I say, on a short leash, maybe? We see that they seem to push a timeline which initially was 2025, first regulation, now it's 27, which still, okay. Let's wait and see, but I think that's pretty courageous. And this seems to be pushed by EASA. They would say that it was an OEM that approached them. And they're taking really a lot of shortcuts. For example, they did not even involve their own aeromedical experts in EASA on this. And they are very reluctant when we push as ECA for aeromedical advice, for aviation psychologists, because if you're sitting at midnight over the Pacific for 4 hours, you might start thinking about things you don't want to think about. What's that going to do with us? And so we've been pushing that. Now they have started a research project with, I think, also the Dutch aerospace research, among others, which should run into 25, I think, where they're going to also, they have one doctor aboard, but they really don't have the aviation psychology aboard. So we're going to have to see where that goes. But you see that it is not really, it's not done in what we would call the proper way. And for example, the aeromedical professionals that you talk to, they tell you that if you're a single pilot somewhere and you're faced with a complex failure involving a complex checklist, that alone can induce incapacitation already, depending on the person. So there's a lot of questions that need to be solved, and my personal opinion is that EASA at one point, and this was probably started to be emphasized probably already before, but when the MAX crisis came, I think EASA, or some people in EASA thought that, hey, you know, we can set the standard. You know, it was for 40 years or 50 years it was the FAA, and EASA is very keen, and that's what we see at ECA. We need to run behind regulation. They come up with, I mean, from drone regulation through RCO, through plenty of other stuff, and stuff that is good. I mean, peer support regulation in Europe, thanks God for having that. But so they really try to leave an imprint. So I wonder if this is not kind of this, some politicking going on, which is really unhealthy when we talk about developing innovative technology for safety.
Yeah, so, you know, just thinking about that for a moment, we've got a study going on, but yet the regulator is out ahead of the results of the study, going ahead and starting to write the regulations. And, you know, rightfully so, ECA asked for human factors and aeromedical people independent to be part of this process, and they said no.
Yeah, at the moment.
Sounds like they've already got the outcome of the study that they want, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think they're, because what you see is that, okay, EASA wants to push this. There is an OEM, which I'm not going to name, which is pushing that obviously behind. But you hear very little. I don't see any of the big European airlines stepping up, really saying, oh, we own this, this is good. I mean, I don't see any, you know, EASA is a European regulator. You have national aviation authorities in every country, which as well. And you don't, there's not much, I mean, I think EASA, to a certain extent, probably also going out on a limb. So I don't think that they have the study results that they want. I think it's a time that is very cautious, and I think our collective reaction to this might have an impact, because, you know, this is it's not on very solid ground, honestly.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned something when we were prepping for this about independent regulator oversight. Doesn't quite sound like that, right?
Well, I don't know. If I remind everyone in public about, you know, together with IFALPA, when, was it last year, the year before, when we made a request to the DOT, when a certain European carrier wanted to operate cargo operations into the US, and we together with IFALPA wrote to the DOT saying that we don't believe EASA and this regulator, there's a kind of a, there's not really an independent oversight there, and we have problems with safety culture. That had a reason, let's put it that way. And yes, I can imagine that, you know, coziness between you know, OEMs and regulators is something that is probably happening in a certain way. But so I would say, yeah, there might, to me, it's a little bit suspect, let's put it that way. And I don't know if I can get back to Europe now, you know.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
I might have to stay here.
Nobody in here is going to say a word. Your secret's safe with us. You know, Bill, you want to talk a bit about, briefly, before we get into the safety starts with two, about what we're doing here and on this and fatigue?
Yeah, we talk about fatigue a little bit. So, in case you all aren't paying attention, I know I've said this a few times, Jason's touched on it. I'm going to risk sounding like a broken record, but I'll remind you one more time. Reduced crew operations, removing pilots from the cockpit has absolutely nothing to do with safety. It's all about cost, okay? There are no airlines that are beating down the manufacturer's doors to remove pilots from the cockpit for safety. It's just not happening, okay? The OEM is selling this idea of RCO to different groups in different ways, and the way they sell it to the regulators and, you know, to the general public and to us, to some respect, is that it's going to create better rested pilots for landing, as it's been mentioned, right? And as Jason touched on, the reason that's important to us is because the international standard for fatigue mitigation just isn't there. It's not as robust as we have in the United States or even they have in Europe either. And so what's being said is that we need one pilot at a cockpit at a time, so the other could be resting longer. So really what's being said is, hey, you know, doing the right thing, that's just too hard. Changing the international standard for fatigue mitigation, bringing it up to modern standards, that's too hard. So we're not going to do that. We're going to do this other thing, okay? But don't worry, it's going to be as safe as we're currently operating. Well, how's it going to be as safe? I fly the MD-11, okay? We have...
I'm sorry.
As Tay-Tay would say, haters gonna hate. Anyway. Too many people here. We have 3 hydraulic systems. We have 3 pneumatic systems. We have 3 generators, and we have almost an infinite number of fuel pumps to pump some of it in the tail. But we have all these systems and redundancies in case of malfunction, right? So one can pick up the load, another one can pick up the load. So how are we going to be as safe when you take the most critical safety and redundant system out of the airplane? I mean, it's ridiculous. And I mean, we've got a lot of international pilots in here. How many times have you been flying, crossing 40 west or 170 east, right at the peak or low, whatever you want to call it, of your window of circadian low? And the only thing keeping your mind sharp-ish and your body awake is the conversation, the mentoring that's going on in the cockpit. I mean, so the other issue I have really with this whole mindset of as safe. When has as safe ever been acceptable in aviation? Throughout our history, has as safe ever? No, it's never been acceptable. We're gonna fundamentally change the way we operate airplanes through this airspace, and our goal is as safe? It's ridiculous. I mean, if we had this mindset in the 1940s, we'd be crashing airplanes literally multiple times a day today. As safe has never been the target. It's always been safer. And I think we need to continue to press forward with that as our goal, not just as safe.
Well said. Gordon, I want to swing back to you real quick on the EMCO papers, how that ICAO process works, and what's an opportunity for intervention on that?
Yes, with pleasure. So if you put back up the slides, I'll give you guys just a quick overview of ICAO and how things work. So it's a tiered structure. Every 3 years, all 193 member countries are invited to Montreal to have an assembly. There, they're looking at what was done over the last 3 years, and they're giving direction for the next 3 years. Not all 193 can be there all the time, so they elect a council who represents the whole assembly in those 3 years. That council is mostly looking at things from a political point of view, so they have a group of technical experts on what's called the Air Navigation Commission. You'll often hear it abbreviated to ANC, who look at things from a purely technical point of view. That ANC, when they're moving things forward, relies on expert panels who are looking at specific topics. So for example, a personnel training licensing panel or a flight operations panel, they'd be the 2 that would get involved here. From the assembly, there were about 600 papers that had to be reviewed. A number of those papers were calling on new work from ICAO. So with this work package, looking at those 3 papers I talked to you about earlier, from the manufacturers, from Europe, and from IFALPA, the recommendation was that the concept be moved forward only if budget and resources are available. That decision has gone to the council. The council's asked the ANC to give feedback. That feedback has come back saying probably not. That doesn't mean it's off the table. What that means is that the council can still review it. They're expected to review it either over our winter or into the spring, or they may decide not to work on it this time. What I can tell you for sure is if they don't look at it in this set of 3 years, it's going to be coming back at the next assembly in 2025. So that's where we are. It's a little bit on pause, not totally gone away, but I would guarantee it's coming back.
and what's our opportunities for intervention?
So we can intervene at all levels. I talked to you already about a positive intervention that we made at the assembly. We put in a counterpoint paper. That paper got really good traction from the floor, including from a number of European countries. Keep in mind, Europe put in a paper supporting EMCO and SIPO. After our paper was submitted, after our interventions, we had a number of European countries that came on board to say the IFALPA approach actually doesn't make sense. We have observer status on the council, so we have a lot of influence. Remember, there's very few pilots in the room often. So having that pilot viewpoint, mostly at the coffee breaks at council, but even more so on the ANC. We have a permanent observer status, which means IFALPA, your voice is heard and it can never be asked to leave the room. So we have the opportunity to intervene there. That helps shape prioritization, it helps shape the discussion, and if proposals for new standards make their way to the ANC, there will be a pilot opportunity to have intervention at that level as well. And finally, and I would say even most importantly, is to encourage pilot participation on all of the panels where they affect flying. That's where you can really have your voice heard in shaping the discussion. So if EMCO CONOPS moves forward, it's maybe a question of when, then making sure we have that pilot viewpoint at every level will be essential.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, because to most of us that aren't involved in this every day, we don't realize that we are plugged in at all those levels, and that ALPA sends considerable resources to help IFALPA and be present at these meetings and make sure that we're getting our voices heard as well. It's not just well, we'll see what happens when we're not around. So thank you for that. Not much time left, maybe about 10 minutes. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the Safety Starts With Two campaign that we kicked off this spring. So when I got elected and our new team, we sat down and said, hey, what's going on with some of this stuff? Believe it or not, we were actually led to believe that our brothers and sisters in Europe were actually supportive of all this stuff, and we were like, we called the ECA and said, hey, let's get together, and Ochan, the president, was spectacular. We got together and briefed on it. They explained that they're in the room to gather information, get this information, but they're absolutely together, and where there had been some divide between ALPA and ECA, we could figure out how we're going to work together. So we got together and said, let's work together on a global message. And then we wrapped in IFALPA as well. So now there's three parties, the Europeans, the ALPA and IFALPA, all working together, and we brought people into DC and had a couple days of meetings to start the Safety Starts with Two campaign and make sure that we're helping all the smaller member associations around the world get this information and get this messaging. So it's been well received. We've been at air shows with this, but Bill, maybe you could talk a little bit more about where our Safety Starts With Two.
Yeah, thanks. You all can see on the screen there, safetystartswith2.com is our website. Our comms team has done a great job putting together this website. It's a great repository of data. All of our articles, white papers, it's updated on a regular basis. So it's a great place for everyone to start becoming more familiar with the RCO issue. But I'm asked questions all the time, and it's the same ones. And Jason, you're probably asked the same ones. But the two that are always asked to me are, why are we spending so much time on this? Why are we spending our resources on this when either one, it's not going to happen in my career, or two, this is an international issue. Why are we concerned about international issues? Let's let the Europeans worry about that, or somebody else. And I think we've done a fairly good job of dispelling the idea that it's not going to happen during our careers, because it's, as Gordon mentioned, it's an ICAO now. So, but I think to the point that it's an international issue, it's absolutely true, it is. But we're part of a international pilot community, and we need to be a part of this. You mentioned our partnership with IFALPA and the ECA. I mean, we need global pilots speaking in one voice, and that's one of our goals. Now granted, different parts of the world, words mean different things in different parts of the world, right? So the wording may be a little different here or there. We may be able to use a little stronger language here in the US than in some places of the world, but the important thing is that we're all pushing the same message in the same way and letting the folks that need to know that RCO is just not a safe option. So other than messaging, IFALPA, again, you mentioned our support for IFALPA, member associations, our resources. That's what we do. We help each other out and, to push this message forward. But, here in the U.S., we're in the middle of an education program, right? Within our MECs. We all know that our pilot groups receive a message the best when it comes to the most local level. And so the Reduced Crew Operations Committee is meeting with different MECs, educating the MECs in an effort to get them to continue the education process with their pilots, because we need an educated pilot force. We need a group that's educated, understands the concerns of RCO, and is ready to go when they're needed. And so education just doesn't stop at the MEC level. It continues with the regulators. I know different departments, including you, had a number of conversations with regulators at all levels, including and up to incoming FAA Administrator Whitaker. And so we educate our regulators, and also the other area of influence is Capitol Hill, the legislators. Given the opportunity, we need to continue to talk with our legislators and ensure that they're up to speed on what the problems are with this issue, because it's going to affect our national airspace, and it's going to affect the U.S. flying public.
Absolutely. And on this subject, Paul, why is it important to be involved in this alliance as ECA?
Well, it's important because although it started in our backyard, it's risks taking over the world, and I think as a worldwide community, we're strongest when we speak with one voice. And I can only echo again what Bill said, even if it's not happening on my watch, because I'll be in pension, we're the custodians of those that came before, and we need to make sure that we're worthy of those that follow us. And if I may just end up with that, and I think that explains why we need to fight this. In the 1990s, Sir Colin Marshall, who was the chairman of BA, at one point he said, and I think it was a reception at IFALPA, he said, the pilots need to be the conscience of this industry. And I think it's never been more important than today. And that's, I think, why we need to fight this.
One thing I failed to mention with our Safety Starts With Two, one of the issues, I mentioned it briefly earlier, but one of the reasons that we really need to take this seriously is, I go back to the international safety standards for arrest, right? They're not there, right? We're lucky here in the U.S. that we're lucky. We fought hard to have the standards that we have, right? And if this continues, even if we weren't worried about it hitting the U.S., if this continues, it's going to create a competition who can get to the bottom fastest, who can do it the cheapest. And whenever you're in that scenario, it's always a negative effect on safety.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I think we'll conclude. I think the goals here were to let everybody know that this threat is out there. It's real. It's not something that's just, oh, this is happening in some other part of the world that'll never happen here, and to let you know what your union is doing to combat this, as well as partnering with our brothers and sisters in Europe, as well as the International Federation of Pilots. This is a threat that is serious, and we're gonna take it as such. We're advocating for a three-pronged approach: get out there and let the public know that this is real. That Safety Starts With Two campaign. Educate our own pilots that this is real. Educate lawmakers. Get lawmakers on our side, and then as a backstop, now we should be negotiating language in our contracts that say that we're, as a backstop, that we're never going to have less than 2 pilots in the cockpit to make sure that, that's going to be an incentive for airlines to fight it, right? Because if airline X says, yeah, we're never going to have less than 2 pilots in the cockpit, now they have skin in the game to make sure they go out there and push back on some of these threats. So with that, it's maintaining safety and security of our flight decks and our traveling cargo and public is essential. So I'd like to thank our colleagues, Gordon, Craig, Paul, Bill. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today and be part of this important topic, and look forward to collaborating with you all on this more as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you.